It started with a bang, the sound of wood splintering under a brutal force, echoing through my apartment like a thunderclap. I'd heard that sound before, heard it in battlefields overseas, felt it reverberating in the tight, aching spaces of my chest. But this was my home. My wife, Lyndon, and I were just sitting there, trying to have a quiet night, the kind of night you hope for after a long week. You know, the kind of night where you get to relax, kick your feet up, and maybe, just maybe, forget the chaos of the world outside. But that calm, that peace, shattered in an instant. I didn't even have time to react. The door burst open, and before we knew it, there was a blue arc of electricity flashing through the air. The taser hit Lyndon first, her body jerking violently, her limbs shaking as the shock coursed through her. I could barely process it. Lyndon collapsed to the floor, her body trembling uncontrollably, the life in her eyes replaced by confusion and terror. The air felt thick, suffocating, like every breath was being stolen from me. I stood there, frozen for a second. Then, the SWAT team stormed in, guns drawn, yelling orders. It was chaos. I could see their eyes wide with adrenaline, ready to act, but they didn't know. They didn't know they had the wrong apartment, the wrong house, the wrong target. They thought they were in the right place, but they were wrong. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. My voice came out steady, calm, almost detached, like I'd been through worse and knew exactly what I had to do. "That's my wife you tossed," I said. Just 5 words. But those words made the room freeze. The officers didn't know what to do. Officer Quarles, the one who'd pulled the trigger on the taser, hesitated. His grip faltered. The tension in the room, thick with fear and confusion, suddenly shifted. One of the officers, Sam, muttered something under his breath, but his eyes kept darting between me and Lyndon, not sure how to respond. I knelt down beside her, my hands steady despite the whirlwind inside me. "Lyndon, it's okay. I'm here," I whispered. But it didn't feel okay. Not by a long shot. The damage had been done. The trust was gone. What had just happened in our Levying room wasn't just a mistake, it was a violation. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. Quarles looked away. He was still trying to make sense of it all. "We had a warrant for this address," he stammered, his voice shaking, eyes not meeting mine. But it didn't make sense. It didn't matter. I knew it. And I told him, cold and direct, "You got the wrong place." There was a moment, a long moment, where no one said anything. The other officers were whispering to each other, trying to figure out what went wrong. But I wasn't interested in their excuses. I wasn't interested in their fear. I was only interested in Lyndon, who was still shaking on the floor, her breath ragged, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Get her medical help," I demanded, my eyes never leaving her. One of the officers, Ruiz, nodded, his expression showing a flicker of sympathy. But that didn't change anything. Lyndon wasn't okay. The night wasn't okay. And this wasn't just going to blow over. This was only the beginning. As the paramedics arrived, I stayed close, my hand gently resting on Lyndon's shoulder. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" one of the paramedics asked, kneeling beside her. "Lyndon," she whispered. That was all she could say. That was all she could manage. They said she'd be fine. Just shaken up, they said. But I didn't believe them. How could I? My wife had just been tasered in front of me, by the people who were supposed to protect us. The system had failed us. Later, when Lyndon had been stabilized, we found ourselves sitting in a sterile hospital waiting room, the lights buzzing above us, casting long shadows. There was a detective who came to speak to us, Detective Harper. She took a seat across from us, her clipboard in hand, eyes guarded but professional. "We're looking into what happened," she said, her voice calm but distant. "We're reviewing the warrant." The words didn't make any sense. How do you mess up something so simple as the address? I asked her, how does something like this happen? Lyndon's voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. Harper sighed, the kind of sigh you make when you know you're not offering any real answers. There was an error with the address on the warrant, she said. The team was looking for a suspect in a nearby neighborhood, but the paperwork wasn't clear. I felt my jaw tighten. That's not good enough. Someone needs to be held accountable. Harper met my gaze, her eyes softening just a little. I agree, she said. That's why we're conducting a full investigation. But I didn't trust the process. Not one bit. I'd been in high-pressure situations before, in the army, but nothing had prepared me for this. Nothing had prepared me for the betrayal I felt in my own home. So, I started pushing back. I called up an old friend from the army, Jake. He knew the system, inside and out. It's not built to admit fault, he said when I called him. But you've got a strong case, Theron. Get a lawyer. Document everything. Don't let them sweep this under the rug. I heard him, loud and clear, and I knew what I had to do. We weren't going to let this slide. Lyndon and I met with a lawyer, someone who didn't mince words. This happens more often than you think, she said. But the use of force in this case was unnecessary and reckless. That gave me a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could make a difference. But we weren't the only ones who had something to say. Lyndon started reaching out to the community, sharing her story with local groups, speaking out for the people who didn't have a voice. She wasn't just a victim, she was going to make sure the world knew what happened to us. Neighbors who'd once stayed silent started speaking up. People shared their own stories of police mistakes and misunderstandings. But not everyone supported us. There were those who believed the police were justified, who thought we were just exaggerating the incident. Some of them questioned our motives, tried to discredit us, made it about anything but the truth. But we didn't back down. A few weeks later, we uncovered something else, something that would change everything. We got a tip from an insider at the police department, someone who wanted to expose the deeper issues. Internal emails, memos, all showing how the warrant had been rushed, how officers had been pressured to act quickly, even though the information wasn't clear. It wasn't just one mistake. It was a pattern. The public outcry was immediate. People were angry. They were demanding change. The department was forced to review its procedures, to overhaul its practices. And as the pressure mounted, the officers involved in the raid were disciplined. But even as the tide began to shift, the fight wasn't over. It would never be over, not until there was real accountability. Lyndon and I were still fighting every day. We were still angry, still scarred, but we were also stronger. We weren't just fighting for ourselves anymore. We were fighting for everyone who had been wronged, everyone who had been silenced. And the story didn't end there. Because when we started telling our story, people started listening. And when people started listening, things began to change. The road to justice was long, and it wasn't easy. But Lyndon and Ito together were determined to keep fighting. For us. For everyone. So here's what I want to ask you. What do you think? What happens when the system fails? When those who are supposed to protect you turn against you? When mistakes are made? Who's responsible? Let us know in the comments below. Share your thoughts, your experiences. We're all part of this fight. And together, we can make a difference.